Hello all, welcome. My name is Eric Fine. This talk is sponsored by the Yale Center for Environmental Communication here at the Yale School of the Environment. The Yale Center for Environmental Communication, or YCEC for short, we focus on 4 areas. First, we conduct research on the psychological, cultural, and political factors that influence environmental attitudes and behaviors. Second, we teach students and train working professionals. Third, we convene a global network of climate communication scholars and practitioners. Finally, we inform and engage the public through environmental journalism, including Yale Climate Connections, a climate-focused news service that engages many thousands of people every day and includes a 90-second radio story that airs on more than 700 radio stations across the US. And also on a lot of international stations if you are in other countries. We think a lot about which audiences in the US are most strategic to engage on climate and environmental issues. And in our partnership work with the American Alpine Club, the Audubon Society, and Protect Our Winters and other organizations, we found that people across the political spectrum who engage with the outdoors are deeply invested in addressing climate change and environmental issues. If you are an organization looking for support in your communications, please reach out to our partnership team at ypccc.partners@yale.edu. For logistics, the chat is closed. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and be aware that you only see the question you asked. We are monitoring the questions, so be assured your question will be seen. We will make a recording of this conversation available on our website and send a link to everyone who registered. Today's speakers will each provide some context for their work at intergovernmental, nonprofit, and private sector organizations working in nature-based tourism around the world. Then they will engage in a panel discussion around how to effectively understand and engage different stakeholders to promote conservation. The discussion will be moderated by Dr. Amy Vedder, a lecturer and McCluskey Fellow at the Yale School of the Environment. Dr. Vedder worked as a practitioner of international wildlife and wildlands conservation for 35 years before joining the Yale School of the Environment. Her ecological studies of mountain gorillas and Angolan colobus, combined with socioeconomic work of her colleague, Dr. Bill Weber, led to their launch of pioneering ecotourism and community outreach programs in Rwanda to help conserve multiple montane forests and their highly endangered and endemic fauna. Dr. Vedder?
Thank you, Eric. We are honored to have 3 speakers with us today. I'm honored to be part of this, and the speakers with extensive and diverse specialties regarding this nexus of tourism and conservation. So I'd like to introduce them before they each present. First, Dr. Susanne Etti is the Global Environmental Impact Manager of Intrepid Travel. It's the world's largest adventure travel company. Her work at Intrepid Travel centers around global decarbonization, specifically around climate change performance, biodiversity, carbon reporting, and transitioning the business to a low carbon economy. Mauricio Miramontes is the co-founder of La Mano del Mono, a nonprofit dedicated to forming alliances among key stakeholders of nature-based tourism destinations to promote conservation and the well-being of local communities in Mexico and Latin America. And then finally, we're pleased to have Dr. Anna Spenceley, who is a sustainable tourism consultant. She chairs the IUCN's World Commission on Protected Areas Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group, the TAPAS. She has compiled the Handbook for Sustainable Tourism Practitioners, an essential toolbox, and co-edited the IUCN Best Practice Guidelines on Tourism and Visitors Management in Protected Areas. So really pleased to have the 3 of you here. It's a great group, and to kick us off, I'm going to hand it right over to Susanne Etti.
Thank you very much. I was waiting for this. Thank you, Amy. So I'm joining you today from Naarm, Melbourne in Australia. And before I start, I would like to pay my respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. For tens of thousands of years, First Nations people have managed the land and its inhabitants to ensure environmental harmony and keeping balance in the environment, which is so central to First Nations ways of being. And we have so much to learn from them about maintaining this equilibrium. Next slide. As you heard, I work for Intrepid Travel. And before I dive into today's topic, let me tell you a bit about Intrepid. We have traveled a long way to be here, and we're so glad we did. So since Intrepid's humble beginnings in 1989, our founders have been passionate about creating positive change through the joy of travel and creating experiences that benefit both people and the planet. In fact, their very first business plan included already donations to communities long before they were even making any money. Now the world's largest adventure travel company and the largest travel B Corp, Intrepid offers more than 1,000 trips across 7 continents. And our network of over 25 destination management companies deliver those innovative, immersive, and sustainable experience-rich travel experience for the curious, the connected, but also the conscious travelers across a variety of styles and themes. Our not-for-profit, the Intrepid Foundation, and our commitment to the UN Sustainable Development Goals ensure that our words are never too far from our work. All of our work is designed to contribute to securing their health and value. Next slide, please. So this is because the tourism industry is at the forefront of the global climate emergency. We have a front row seat to the crisis that is unfolding in many iconic natural areas and destinations across the world. At the same time, before COVID hit, the sector contributed to 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So individually, but also collectively as a global industry, we are all feeling the effects of these new extreme weather events. The increase in global average temperature since pre-industrial times is already damaging the planet's ecosystem in ways that are harmful to biodiversity and dangerous to people. Climate change impacts are being felt across the globe, from the polar region to our freshwaters, oceans, and to our wildlife. Next slide. In fact, the reality is that it's no longer just a climate crisis, but also a biodiversity crisis. Nature is a critical ally in the fight against climate change and nature loss. Evidence shows that strong and healthy ecosystem can help us to fight climate change, as well as build resilience and help us to adapt to climate impacts. Coastal and marine tourism is highly dependent on the quality of coastal and marine ecosystem and is extremely vulnerable to threats such as climate change and biodiversity loss. Similarly, wildlife tourism is an extremely popular product, but it's at risk of being compromised not only by the exploitation industry, but also by the threat of climate change to Earth's most natural creatures and their habitats. So ensuring the long-term survival of species and ecosystem diversity is really critical to support the local communities and economies which rely on the tourism industry. And that's why in 2021, Intrepid signed the Get Nature Positive Pledge, which commits us to elevate nature within the business agenda, continuously enhancing our understanding of nature-related business impacts, and identifying opportunities to take nature-positive action and share learnings with peers. In the next section, I will delve into a couple of examples of what we are doing with a variety of stakeholders to effectively communicate this crisis and to mobilize action to prevent green and blue spaces around the world. Next slide. Let's start with what we are doing on a customer level. We're seeing nature-based tourism becoming one of the most popular forms of travel, particularly off the back of the pandemic and the growing keenness of customers to get outdoors again and experience the natural wonders of the world. At a product level, Intrepid has really invested in building out our walking and trekking products to help travelers get back to nature and experience the world's most authentic landscapes in a low impact, environmentally and friendly way. We call this slow travel, which is a form of responsible tourism encouraging a cultural shift towards a more conscious mindset. It emphasizes the importance of connecting deeper with people, culture, food, and learning something new along the way. We offer walking and trekking tours in some of the world's most famous peaks and valleys, including the Kilimanjaro, Patagonia, and Machu Picchu. Next slide, please. As this nature-based tourism phenomenon continues to grow, so does our travelers' interest in exploring some of our planet's last great wilderness, such as Antarctica. Antarctica has become a symbol for climate change. So how does a sustainable travel company balance operating trips in this fragile ecosystem with meeting its environmental and social responsibilities? Intrepid made the decision to operate in Antarctica as we believed it would offer an incredible natural experience and create value for our customers, partners, and shareholders. We also knew that operating our own product would provide us with greater control of all aspects, including environmental consideration. More responsible Antarctica tourism must include a heightened commitment to decarbonization. Like all our Intrepid trips, we measure our emissions and decarbonize operation in line with our science-based emission reduction target. All our voyages are 100% carbon neutral. The continent has long been supported by strong governance, unlike many of the other destinations which we operate. Our approach to tourism in Antarctica can provide that baseline for a more responsible cruise industry worldwide. As part of our decarbonization journey, we identify areas for improvement. Even small changes can have an impact. For example, being the first Antarctic operator to eliminate seafood from our regular service and introduce a one plant-based evening on board our ship, the Ocean Endeavour. Next slide. The Antarctic Treaty governs our activity on the continent, which means travel operations tend to be developed both directly and indirectly in the pursuit of peace and science. And this makes holidaying in Antarctica truly different from a cruise anywhere else. Intrepid has incorporated citizen science into our polar voyages, most notably in our partnership with the Worldwide Fund on WWF Giants of Antarctica sailing. Along our regular teams of Arctic experts, WWF Australia scientists join this tour to share insight into whale conservation as they conduct cutting-edge research on these underwater giants. This allows travelers to work alongside WWF Australia scientists to further their research into whales. Data collected on this trip, including by travelers, contribute directly to understanding of whale population. Next slide, please. A major drunkard of nature-based tourism is also wildlife experiences. At Intrepid, we believe that wild animals should be viewed with no contact or interaction, doing what they do best, living in the wild. But sadly, we also recognize tourism can be one of the main contributors to animal cruelty. That's why we have joined forces with organizations like World Animal Protection, who we have been working with over the past 12 years to design animal welfare guidelines, which guide our approach and provide others in the industry with a framework for responsible wildlife tourism. Animals are an extremely important part of our natural ecosystem, and we have an obligation to protect their habitats and ensure their longevity, which ultimately will result in better wildlife tourism experience for all people and planet. Next slide. We truly believe that the tourism industry wants to be on the right side of the history and play its part in securing long-term economic and environmental sustainability. But to do this, we need to go greater level of coordinated industry action. The Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action on Tourism is a good example of how the industry has come together for the first time to align on objectives. Next
Another
slide.
minute, please, Susanne. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, no one actor in our supply chain can act in isolation. In addition to a coordinated industry action to really secure the future of our natural world, we need governments and policymakers to come to the table and commit to real legislative action. From business to academia, government, and the individual traveler, it is critical we all do what we can to understand, protect, and preserve the world's natural habitats, wildlife, and environment for future generations. Protecting key ecosystems, sustainable livelihood, biodiversity, and climate action has never been more important. Next slide. It is not too late to create positive change. Thank you, and I'd now like to hand over the virtual space to Mauricio.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Then, thank you very much. I'm really excited to listen different efforts from different countries, and I'm really also motivated to share some stories about what's going on specifically in Mexico. Let me share the screen. Just confirming that you can see the presentation. Yes.
Perfect.
Excellent. So my name is Mauricio Miramontes. I live in Chiapas in South Mexico, where is very close to the Lacandona rainforest, this second largest rainforest we have in our continent. And I would like to share some stories built on these 15 years working with La Mano del Mono. In La Mano del Mono, what we do is to strengthen sustainable tourism in protected areas, connecting social enterprises with markets and incentivizing sustainable practices on operations. So just to give you a little bit of context of the challenges we live, we do see already the strong impacts of climate change. Tropical areas are very sensitive to them. So we see less humidity, we see drier seasons and longer drier seasons. Coffee producers are not able to produce their coffees, the coffee crops, and so they need to move on to the top of the mountains. So this agriculture line is also moving further. And so besides all this climate change pressure, we do also have a lot of extractive economies pressure. This is actually the main cause of the emissions of climate change, or gases to contribute to climate change. And it's very interesting, for example, that here in the tropical area of Mexico, the main cause is for generating these emissions is deforestation, and mainly because of growing on monocrops and also cattling. So 50% of our forests are not here, particularly here in this Lacandonian rainforest. More than 70% of it does not longer exist. Only in 50 years. I mean, it's pretty fast, pretty amazing how in one generation we have created all this situation. And due to this situation, there is also a very strong migration from Central America and South Mexico of rural and indigenous communities. So also in the last 50 years, 50% of rural and indigenous populations do not live anymore in their lands, mainly because of a lack of opportunities. And there is a lot of migration either to the cities here in Mexico or to the US. So that's the general context of the challenges we live behind tourism as an activity. And so what we do in La Mano del Mono, we've been working for 15 years, and we have this market-ready platform to strengthen capabilities of local social enterprises to be connected to markets and incentivize sustainable practices in their operations through market-driven activities. So we've been working with more than 500 local enterprises operating in 90 protected areas of Mexico, volcanoes, jungles, deserts, in the reefs, mountains, in different ecosystems. And this has had an impact on more than 40,000 families. We calculate rural and indigenous families that complement their livelihoods with tourism. It's not that they and that was very visible with COVID. It's not that they depend on tourism, because they do have self consumption economies, but it's an important complement. And we have developed 5 public policies on sustainable tourism in Mexico. So that's like the general framework where we are working. And I would like to focus one particular challenge we are living in Mexico. So one question is like, how many visitors do we have in protected areas? So the right answer is that we actually don't know. We have some estimations, but this is the official data. Just before the pandemic, we had officially registered 3.5 million. And based on a very conservative estimation, that should be between 70 and between 20 and 10% of the real visitors. So it means that we should be receiving between 17 and 25 million visitors. Here's a mistake with this dollar. It's not about money. So that's the volume of visitors we more or less have in this protected area. So in Mexico, and also another interesting data for Mexico and Latin America is that 80% of biodiversity is in the lands of less than 10% of the population, and this population usually is indigenous and rural. So how do we communicate in this context? So these are the protected areas, and that's the reality. So we can see massive tourism arriving to these very biodiversity hotspots. So it's a big challenge, and there is another challenge that is in terms of budget for managing and conserving these protected areas. So the current budget for all Mexico in 2019, it's about $6.5 million, and only less than 10% of visitors contribute economically for conservation activities on these protected areas. So at least there should be $26 million of income from this tourism for managing these protected areas, but that doesn't really occur. So one of the challenges.
Mauricio, sorry to interrupt, but if you're trying to advance your slides, we're not seeing them. You're still on the first slide, so just to let you know.
Okay. So I've been advancing, but anyway, so I guess, I don't know, I'm gonna change this. Sorry, thank you for the notice. Let me see, now it should be working. So can you see a different slide?
Yeah, go to the next slide. Yep, perfect.
Excellent, thank you for letting me know.
Yep.
So here I'm sharing these numbers in terms of how many visitors and the income that it's generated. Here are some images of what's going on in these protected areas. and the context of how do we communicate in this in this context of receiving so more and more massive tourism in very short seasons of the year. So so just to give you context of like a very specific case study in Balandra, for example, which is one of the top 10 most beautiful beaches of the world in different magazines, and in Mexico's very famous and very visited. So it receives about 330,000 visitors per year. And the budget for managing that is $5,000. So it's very, very complex to try to manage with this minimum budget. So there are consequences of management of waste, management of sewage water, the massification, their toilets. There are very complex situations. And here, for example, which is in South Mexico, in the Lacandon jungle, this community receives 15,000 visitors. There is no management budget for the 2,000 hectares of community-based protected area. It's a protected area that is managed by the community. So there is a conflict in terms of governance, because tourism is coming, enjoying this amazing jungle, and paying and enjoying the services of food, lodge, guides, but the community lacks of budget for monitoring, surveillance, and these activities that requires the conservation area. So understanding this complex context of where tourism is happening in these natural areas, we have been developing Reserva Natura, which is a platform that allows protected areas, either private, public, or community managed areas, to integrate a booking system and a visitor management system that allows them to increase the connection with the visitors, to also facilitate the communication that visitors are actually to be aware that they are actually entering to a protected area.
Mauricio, just if you could wrap up, I'm sorry. I hate to stop this, but
Sure, thank you. I'm completing. So this platform is moving the budget from $5,000 to $500,000 for Balandra, and visitors are engaged on being able to book, and also tour operators. And the same is happening in Lacandon jungle. So it's moving from $0 to $30,000 for managing the community managed protected area. So this is the challenge we face in Mexico. And here are my two children, Ictan and Tlali. And so we are very committed to allow them to enjoy the Mexico and the Latin America that we are enjoying right now. And thank you very much.
okay, and we'll pass it on to Anna.
Great, thank you very much. And I really sympathize with those problems of not being able to pay for the conservation management of an area. Okay, can you see my slides okay?
Very good.
Okay, let me know if they're moving, please. Okay, so it's a real pleasure to be here today with you all. I'm going to talk about four main topics today, starting with a little bit of background on the IUCN's Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group. So we're a voluntary technical network. We have about 700 members globally at the moment, and we bring together people working on tourism and protected areas, whether they're in academia, government, private sector destinations. We try to help develop knowledge that can help people working in protected area tourism, including best practice guidelines and journal editions, and also technical guidance on particular issues. We also have done some survey work. So, for example, Yufei Leung and Kelly Bricker on our EXCO did a survey on biodiversity information needs of protected area tourism officials. We try to build capacity through webinars like this one, and we also develop massive open online courses. We have one coming out shortly on monitoring the economic impacts of visitors in protected areas. Amid COVID, we ran a big webinar on how to respond in nature-based tourism destinations. In advocacy, we worked through the IUCN to try and advocate for sustainable tourism with the thousands of IUCN members. So the last World Conservation Congress, we had Motion 130, which was approved by a landslide, and we hope that will help communicate sustainable tourism through the IUCN networks. This is our very vibrant EXCO. We're really lucky to have working on different themes in different areas to support our memberships. And if you want to get involved, we have a variety of options on social media. Membership is free. You're very welcome to join if you think it'll be interesting. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about the growth in demand for sustainable tourism. And it's clear from market research that's been done by various people during the pandemic that there has been a real growth in demand for sustainable travel. So back in 2021, a survey amongst 30,000 travelers by Booking.com showed that 73% of travelers would be more likely to choose accommodation if it was doing sustainability practices. And the same survey done in 2022 found that the majority of people wanted to have holidays that were protecting the natural environment. So it's clear that there is a demand there. However, people are finding it difficult to find those kind of trips. So some saying that there aren't enough sustainable options available, they can't find them, they perceive them as being too expensive, although I actually am not sure that that's entirely true, but it is a perception and don't know where to find the options. Okay, so what's happening about this? So some of the OTAs are starting to try and mainstream information about sustainable travel. So under the Travelist Coalition, which was spearheaded by the Duke of Sussex, a series of online travel agents and also Visa have come together to try and mainstream sustainable tourism information for both travelers and for the industry. And where you can see this today on your booking platforms is Booking.com highlights travel sustainable properties and tells you what kind of sustainability criteria they are fulfilling and whether they are certified by third parties. And Google has the same process. It looks a bit different, but it's basically built on the same system. And the idea is that this will be rolled out through a series of online travel agents across the world. And in terms of flight emissions and carbon, Google and Skyscanner under the Travelist Coalition again allow you to establish how much carbon dioxide your flight would be emitting if you bought it, and allow you to compare different options and also compare for some routes traveling by plane or by train, which is really helpful. This is what it looks like on Skyscanner, for example. So these put the power in the hands of the traveler to decide what kind of impact they are going to have from the travel they're going to take. And recently, the World Travel and Tourism Council released a guide for the industry on how to promote more nature-positive travel and tourism. And this includes a toolkit that helps enterprises to evaluate and monitor and report on their contributions to nature, their operations. So now just quickly, I wanted to give a few examples of conservation messaging post-pandemic. So one of the things that came out right at the beginning of the pandemic was this, obviously people couldn't travel, people were in lockdown, people were locked inside. And this ethos of healthy parks and healthy people, that we need nature, it reduces our stress, it's good for our health, it's good for our exercise. And a real realization that people really wanted to get back outside and into natural areas as soon as possible. But then we found once we were released from lockdown and allowed to go back outside, that new cohorts of tourists were entering into protected areas who weren't used to going there, maybe. So people were hiking up mountains in flip-flops and getting rescued. People were leaving wet litter behind them in destinations. There was overcrowding, places had to be closed, and protected area managers in some instances just weren't prepared to be able to look after such a big influx of people. So in some destinations, such as in Thailand, they developed apps to allow visitors to know what destinations, how busy destinations were going to be, so that they could check in and check out. There were also reservation systems in for day visitors in certain protected areas, including in the States, which allowed protected areas to know how many people were coming, and also visitors to make a decision based on how many were going to be there. On a slightly different tack, on this bucket list communication messaging topic that we're speaking on today, I just wanted to share something from Rwanda. I recently helped the World Bank to develop an economic update on Rwanda, and part of this focused on nature-based tourism. Rwanda made a decision to increase the prices of its gorilla permit fees to $1,500 a day for an hour with the gorillas in 2017. And the year after that, you saw that the proportion, the number of gorilla permits sold in Rwanda went down, and the number being sold in neighboring Uganda went up. But if we look at data that was prepared by Dr. Amy Vedder, who's on this course, who kindly shared this slide of hers, we found that the revenue, overall revenue from fewer number of permits being sold is actually much higher than it was before COVID. So in terms of communication messaging, whereas Rwanda had told its visitors, please come, pay more, we're going to expand the conservation habitat for gorillas, some people decided, well, I like the message, but I want to save some money, so I'm going next door. While other people said, well, I'm going to go to Rwanda and I'm going to pay that extra money. And it's really interesting if you think about those bucket list kind of trips. Something else that really arose got stronger during COVID were virtual safaris. So there were companies that were trying to offset the losses of COVID by generating income by offering paid for wildlife safaris. Others were getting their rangers who had nothing to do because there were no guests. They were going out to the field and recording safaris as they would normally do, and then posting them for free on the internet. And in other places, there have been virtual field trips and lessons offered by destinations for people that can't necessarily get to the field. And these have also provided a mechanism to generate income for conservation with very low carbon emissions, and also getting money to the destinations that need it. So that's the end of my snapshot ideas. I just like to say that there are a variety of really useful information on the web. You're welcome to check out my website. These and other resources are there if you want more information. You're welcome to join the Tapas group too. And I look forward to the discussion now. And with that, I'll hand back to Amy. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I'd like to thank the panelists for sharing their time, their expertise, the efforts that they're engaged in. I think we have a lot to draw on from their ideas and their work, which leads us now to the section of the webinar to deal with some questions that have been posed by you, our webinar participants. So thanks again to those who submitted questions earlier, and we'll try to catch some as we can on the fly from the Q&A section function that's available to you. And we're going to try to focus a bit on one of the themes of tonight, which is the role of communications, serving these links between tourism and conservation. So let me start out with one that had been submitted. Tourism can be seen to connect people to nature and build constituencies by doing that. People go out and seeing it and caring about it. It also can be seen to put nature at risk. And I think you've heard about over subscription to tourists to some of these protected areas you've just heard about from a couple of our speakers, whether that's direct impacts on wildlife, wildlands, or the carbon emissions as part of the tourism industry. How do you deal with a dilemma that seems to be shaping up, and how do you talk to various audiences about this, over loving our nature to a point of injury? And maybe start with Mauricio and Anna, since you talked about some of these things specifically. How do we change our messaging or create the right expectations?
Yes. As you said, I will say that there are different levels of communication. Probably the deepest one, and also probably the most difficult to reach. And Intrepid Travel, I see them here very often in Chiapas, and I believe that they do it amazingly. It's going deep into the experience. I mean, bringing people to the experiential, yes, to the experiential part with the local communities in these natural areas. And I guess there at that moment, every person has a different eureka moment, but there is a deep connection. And I will say that's a very, I mean, for us also in La Mano del Mono, that's the objective, to bring visitors to live these moments. And then in terms of communication before the visit, for us, it's we are just starting with this journey of integrating technology to be able to communicate these visitors, because in our case, most of the visitors do not even know that they are visiting a protected area. So there is a challenge there, because the expectations of how to, yes, just to behave and what to expect on these places might be very different of what it is actually expected by the community or by the protected area managers. So there is a lack of communication there. So this technology is helping us a lot to connect and align that expectations. So with videos, with information on their cell phone, so they are ready before, while they are planning the visit and before being there, they can plan. And most of the people, they are very open to that and willing to support the areas, most of the visitors. So behind that, there are also a governance challenge, because it's working with governments, it's working with local communities. The local communities do have very different ways of organizations and governance. So what are the messages that either public sector, community sector, or private sector want to share with the visitors? There is an important variation of diversity on that messages. So I will say that the challenge is in terms of governance behind the communication.
Anna, I'm thinking again about some of the downsides of the potential downsides of the impacts of tourism. And again, you spoke about concerns about too many people going to some of these areas, and not being able to go possibly, or not being able to do what one might want to do. How does one create the right kind of communications and expectations for that to avoid those downsides?
Well, I was wondering if you mind if I just answer the same question. Sure. For now, just about development first. Yeah, I'd just like to recognize that any kind of tourism is going to have an impact on nature and wildlife. It's inevitable. And that's why some IUCN categories of protected areas recommend no visitation at all if they're too fragile or too sensitive. But in others, like in national parks and sustainable use areas, development can take place under certain conditions. So you might do an environmental impact assessment for any kind of development to make sure that you understand what the impacts are going to be, and that you've got enough information to decide how you're going to mitigate them, or if you're going to go ahead at all. Or you could use previously disturbed sites. But it's also important to recognize that tourism can generate income to pay for conservation where it is channeled, especially if it's channeled directly towards the place where it is generated, and can also help support the livelihoods of people living around those areas who may suffer from human-wildlife conflict, or they may have reduced access to the resources in the protected area because it's protected. So resources from the IUCN, including the best practice guidance that we've developed by the TAPAS group and concession guidance we've developed, including materials for the Convention on Biological Diversity and the International Finance Corporation, can help provide guidance on how to reduce those kind of impacts.
Great, thank you. Let's switch to another question. Which stakeholders should be engaged to more effectively communicate the value of these green or blue spaces around the world, and how do we amplify those voices? Maybe Susanne?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to answer. I think it's a range of stakeholders to engage here. So I might just give 2 examples. One from the ground is really about our leaders that are on the ground that Mauricio has probably met some. Sort of like they're really our climate ambassadors, and I'm sort of from that aspect, because they're kind of, as part of their leader training, getting trained on responsible travel. They're learning about the work that we're doing in the climate and conservation, especially around now, focusing more also on biodiversity work, and sort of being then able on the ground really to communicate with customers to really ensure we're leaving the place in a way, even in a better way, and taking, for example, waste out, the recycling aspect. I haven't touched in my talk around the issues on single-use plastic and how we're really promoting the kind of bringing your own water bottle, the refilling, etc. So that's, I think, is a really crucial where the leader is coming in. Another good stakeholder, maybe adding on from what I was saying, is also the work that our non-for-profit, the Intrepid Foundation, is doing. And a good example is here in Australia, in Victoria, we're working with the Blue Carbon Lab, which sits under the Deakin University here in Victoria, that actually works in wetland restoration areas. So that's really around restoring these areas, but the beauty is also that our staff, for example, get an opportunity to take part as part of their volunteer hours to be citizen science for the day. So again, it's about also bringing that message of conservation biodiversity to all our staff. So it's just another example of a stakeholder to involve.
Yeah. If you don't mind, let me switch to something that's very timely. Travel and tourism has seen a massive slowdown. Some of you have mentioned that during the pandemic. It's higher in numbers than ever before, or at least in some places. In that time, that downtime, how have you seen the industry or those involved in tourism improving messaging around ecotourism and traveling responsibly? This is a time to step back and think again. How do you see operators or others having responded to that opportunity to think? Maybe starting with Anna.
Okay, so thank you, Amy. So I mentioned earlier that some of the enterprises were doing more virtual tours to promote their conservation message, to say that we're still here, we're still working on conserving these habitats, we're still paying our staff so that they are not, and their families are not going hungry. Some of those companies during that time were doing more conservation efforts on the lands, conserving forests, making sure that there was not more illegal wildlife crime going on in their areas. Although interesting, in some destinations, wildlife crime actually went down during parts of the pandemic. For example, rhino poaching declined in South Africa in some parts because people couldn't move, or poachers couldn't move around. They couldn't move around the illegal products. But in other countries, like in Uganda, it actually increased. And so it was quite interesting to see those kind of impacts. In terms of their conservation messaging, otherwise, I'm not entirely sure. One thing some of the work that I have been doing is on looking at the finances of nature-based tourism operators and how some of them have really, really struggled through this period just to keep their companies afloat, to keep their payments for conservation going during this period. People that have supported community enterprises for years and years and years and just having to make heartbreaking decisions when all the savings are gone and they're having to shutter their doors. And then also when they're trying to reopen post-pandemic, they have to have new investment to redo the maintenance of their sites, which have maybe been mothballed, and also retrain staff new staff and staff that have not been working for a while. So from my side, what I've seen the private sector on their conservation messages, they've been really calling out to finance institutions for more concessional finance to enable them to get restarted and carry on their conservation work and their support of communities. So if we can get that message through to the banks, to the DFIs, to the development agencies, to give them the support that they need urgently, and then they can keep sustaining these areas. Thank you.
And Susanne and Mauricio, maybe briefly, we've got a couple minutes before, I'm sorry, we're going to have to wrap up.
No, happy to come. Maybe I bring a different aspect how we used it internally, because obviously we saw that massive slowdown during that time. And so we used this time really around to double down on our purpose and our commitment to help to rebuild more responsible, but it wasn't about Intrepid, it was actually helping the industry. So to give you two examples, like Intrepid enabled me to spend around 30% of my time on advocacy, and that included actually working with tourism declares a climate emergency over the 2 years. And I was basically looking after the community of practice of our tour operators that were signing up. And a second example was actually during this time, I authored a couple of open source documents, and that included the carbon measurement guide, but also 10-step guide to kind of start your climate journey, as well as the animal welfare toolkit. And these documents were really, they were free, and they're still free. They're free to download from the website. And it was really kind of helping others that are resource constrained, that obviously no income coming in, that they could also use that time to use these documents to develop their own animal welfare policy, or start with the 10-step guide to start their climate journey internally, so that they actually come out better.
Mauricio, one thing I'm interested in is maybe the switch to local or domestic tourism. Have you seen that as one way of filling this gap during a pandemic?
You mean this gap in terms of communication, of messaging by
No.
local operators?
I was thinking more of the gap of international tourism being closed down largely during the pandemic. And, you know, I think you've talked about local or domestic tourism as part of the antidote to that.
Yes. Well, in Mexico, it's very interesting because 85% of international tourists go to 5 destinations in Mexico, where you can find coronitas and margaritas and amazing sun and beaches. So the Caribbean, Cancun and Riviera, well, Mexico City, Los Cabos, Riviera Nayarit. So actually, during the pandemic, domestic tourist was the one supporting the industry, and so even though there was of course a super lack of international tourists, but they anyway, most 85% of them go to only 5 destinations in Mexico. So the rest of the country are mainly dependent and connected to domestic tourists. And here in Mexico, we didn't have very strong restrictions during COVID. So we were, as a domestic tourism, we were able to travel. So even though during from between March and summer till that first Christmas, there was very few tourism. It was very, very interesting to see how local communities do have other local economies and self-consumption economies. So people went back to fish, the people, they did have their crops, people, they had their forest, and they had other ways of living. And tourism in most of the places, so the lack of tourism was not, I mean, it could be, I don't want to say that it didn't have a lot of impact, but yes, it did have an impact, but even though it had an impact, local communities were able, most of them, to strengthen their livelihoods with other activities.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, we're gonna have to leave it at that. It's so hard. I would really enjoy having another hour or more with all of you, and we can't in order to maintain the type of schedule that's used for these webinars. So, Eric, I turn it over to you, and again, thank all of you for your participation here, but most importantly, for the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Amy, for moderating the conversation, and Susanne and Mauricio and Anna for your thoughtful insights. We'll send everyone a follow-up email after this event with the recording and information on the next event of our spring speaker series, where we hope you'll join us for a panel on how museums are engaging their audiences on climate change on March 10th at noon Eastern Standard Time. Have a great rest of your week, everyone, and take care.